Hi everyone, good day, and I would like to thank the organizers of this talk for allowing me to share my thoughts on the divorce bill, and I would like to talk about it using certain social science perspectives derived from the literature of religion and international relations. In this very short talk, I am comparing what happened during the RH or the reproductive health law debates in 2011, 2012, and its parallelism with what's happening right now with the ongoing debates on divorce. So, so let us first revisit on what happened. Let us first revisit what happened during the RH bill debate from 2010 to until its passage in December 2012. So, the background of RH law, it was initially filed in the early 1990s, and it is a proposed law in response to various UN organized conferences on women, gender, and population. I think one of the most popular conferences here is the Beijing conference before. And from a policy perspective, we working in the area of public policy, politics, and international relations, we view the passage of the RH bill in 2012 as a form of policy transfer. And by policy transfer, I refer to the process wherein we look for other policy practices or policy solutions from other territories and jurisdictions. So there are many ways to understand policy transfer, but the one of my favorite is the what we call the norm diffusion theory. So the norm diffusion theory is introduced by the following scholars, Martha Finmore and Catherine Seking. So before I go to the step-by-step stages of norm diffusion theory, I would like to first discuss what is a norm. So in international relations, a norm is a certain kind of practice, performance of behavior that is acceptable to a certain standard, and such performance of such a behavior enables a certain state to become part of the so-called civilized world. So in that case, I would like to clarify that norms in international relations are not eternal, they are not dogmas. Some norms before are already considered as taboos right now, and some norms that are considered valid at present moment are considered taboos before. So there is a way in and a political process on how norms are being internalized and legitimized in the contemporary situation. So for Martha Finmore and Catherine Sicking, the diffusion of a norm undergoes into three stages or steps. Number one is the norm emergence phase. The second is the norm cascade phase. And the third one is the norm internalization phase. Key to understand the norm emergence phase is the role of norm entrepreneurs and policy entrepreneurs. So there are usually individuals who propose new ideas to address existing challenges and issues. And in order for these individuals to make their new idea become more popular and more palatable and more convincing, they form or they collectivize and they form this what we call platforms. Organizational platforms. So these organizational platforms are the ones who are tasked to promote the idea through different forms through different forms of methods or tactics like lobbying until a until such idea is already institutionalized in a certain state, institutionalized via a policy, a law or office or unofficial practice. Then what happens is the shift toward the norm cascade phase. So what is the norm cascade phase? The norm cascade phase is the stage where a certain number of states were persuaded by the original state who accepted the norm. So this original state, maybe I just label it as state A. When state A, for example, convinces other states to also follow the norm that state A has already internalized or institutionalized. And this is a very important phase because this is the phase where we have this K group, wherein a certain number of states will religiously follow this kind of norm, and they themselves will become active articulators of such norm. And until the norm cascade phase happens until a certain tipping point will happen. And then with the articulation of this K group in the second step in the norm cascade phase, also comes the translation or the consequence of their articulation or spreading or promotion of such norm through persuasion of other states that do not belong to the original K group. And this step is called the norm internalization, wherein other states that are not belonging to the K group organized by state A will internalize and institutionalize the norm they receive from the from state A or the other members of the K group. So usually this norm diffusion theory is used. The norm diffusion theory is usually used to understand the promotion of specific economic ideas, particularly neoliberal ideas from certain states in the West, and then how allied states of these countries use this norm to also persuade other states to follow for a certain political project. So one of the criticisms of the norm diffusion theory is it is too linear. So we need to acknowledge that the internalization of norms, the global norms is not a linear process or it is not smooth. We always recognize that there's always domestic opposition and contestations that will occur against the internalization of a global norm. So I believe that the successful legislation of the reproductive health law in 2012, as well as the ongoing debates right now to pass the divorce bill in the Philippines are following these three phases identified by the norm diffusion theory. And this is because of the following reasons. So most commentators and existing policy studies state that the RH law was passed in 2012 because of several factors. Number one, it was the first time that a Philippine president, the former President Benigno Aquino III, had expressly supported a bill that is opposed by the Catholic hierarchy in the Philippines for decades. Second, it has implicit threats. There was already implicit threats coming from donor countries in the Philippines that we might not get additional funding, additional aid if the Philippines will not pass a reproductive health bill. So you will see here that this implicit threats coming from donor countries is a manifestation of the activities of the K group present in the second step of the norm diffusion theory, which is the norm cascade phase. And then, of course, you have the sustained advocacy of supporters for more than 2 decades. So you have the individuals and groups, local and foreign groups that support and persuade policymakers and legislators to institutionalize a reproductive health law. And we can consider them as this what we call norm entrepreneurs and policy entrepreneurs, but on the step three stage already. And then there's also strategies the that the reproductive health bill was reformulated initially as a population management issue into women's rights or MDG concern. And these factors that I mentioned are from mainstream accounts. So my knowledge about this RH bill debate and the role of religious actors is actually based on my previous studies. This is actually my master's thesis because I argued that the legislation of the reproductive health bill was a form of Philippine internationalization on on the norms promoted by countries that aim to legitimize and promote the ideals of the Millennium Development Goals during that time. And the focus of my study is not only focused on this internalization process from global or international to local through an institutionalization of our law policy. But what I am curious in my master's thesis before was what is the role of the religious actors who supported the RH law. So I wanted to know why and how impactful uh, their um, their efforts to support the RH law in terms of in lieu of its passage, in lieu of its passage in 2012. So, in to understand the role of religious actors in the passage of the RH law before, I am using the following frameworks from religion and IR literature called public theology. So, what is public theology? Public theology is a approach to understand the position of different religious actors, leaders, or factions in terms of contemporary social and public issues. It acknowledges that religious groups are not homogeneous, nor they are monoliths. It acknowledges that there's always fragmentation within religious groups. And we have and during the RH debate, we were able to witness that for example, there are prominent Catholic priests from certain religious orders and even religious nuns, brothers, etc., who have opposed the official line of the CBCP with regards to their position on the reproductive health law. So I inquired about that role and I used the framework of public theology. And what makes public theology useful in the analysis is that number one, there's a recognition of fragmentation within a religious group. Second, um, this public theology is a product of the expertise of religious actors. So according to Nokhat Sandal, who is the proponent of the public theology approach, the effectivity of public theology is also based on the idea that religious actors are experts and they constitute an epistemic community, an international epistemic community. And in the case of the RH law, the epistemic community is actually really big. You have you have this and discrete and um, discrete theologians who are either laypersons or ordained that are actually supportive of this measure, not only in the Philippines but also in abroad. That they are quite liberal in their interpretation of the Humani Vitae encyclical of the late Pope Paul VI. And what further makes their public theology or interpretation, liberal interpretation, as more authoritative and appealing is because number one, as I have said, they are experts and they are considered knowledgeable on what Nukhet Sandal defined as hermeneutics and exegesis. I'm not sure whether Nukhet Sandal's definition of hermeneutics and exegesis similar with the one being used in philosophy and theology, but for Nukhet Sandal, hermeneutics is the science, let's say the science of interpreting religious artifacts, religious texts, and all sources of religious doctrine, while exegesis is the translation of this analysis of hermeneutics into a language that is intelligible by the laypersons or by the ordinary people. So yeah, so with the use of public theology, there is now an acknowledgement that there is this presence of competing interpretations. Usually in the modern parlance, particularly in religious politics, like for example in the US, it's usually framed by the media with this boxing terms such as conservative and progressive. Uh, since it has been the typical label, there is this tendency to be really very rigid in that definition. So one of religion and IR scholars named Jonathan Chow, in his PhD thesis about the again the passage of the reproductive health law in the Philippines as part of as an internalization of a global norm. He said in his dissertation that the better classification is we need to depart from the conservative progressive um, dichotomy, but instead we use these alternative terms, which I actually agree with him: preservationist and accommodationist. So what's the difference between preservationist and accommodationist? Preservationists are those religious leaders and actors who who offer a public theology, who interpret religious sources based on what is really written. So it's more of the what is indicated in the letter of the law. On the other hand, accommodationists are those who are who borders on this what we call spirit of the law, but they still believe that the that the teaching of their own religion as true, but they believe that relaxing a certain interpretation will enable their religious group to achieve more fruitful um, more fruitful objectives or achieve a more goods. So something like that. So that's the idea behind behind that. So this preservationist accommodations label, this label is different because this is different from the conservative progressive label because when we talk about progressive, it has this idea of total rejection. But for the accommodationism, they still believe that this is true, but there is a need to kind of relax the interpretation. So during the RH debate, this is very apparent. Certain Catholic and Protestant leaders acted as accommodationists. Within Catholicism, you have these Jesuit luminaries that express their different position in favor of the RH law. You have a feminist nun in a school in Manila, that also that you will see her visibility with the feminist coalition, with the reproductive health coalition. You also have these theologians from a certain Catholic school, Catholic University, that expressed support for its passage. Same also with some Catholic leaders in another university in Manila, in Taft, that also express a statement. So you have the accommodationists and you have the preservationists. So you have the religious orders and their schools in the U-Belt in España who who kept the official line of the CBCP. So yeah. So what is interesting for me in my studies that these accommodationist religious leaders articulated a public theology that provided moral justification for the RH law. So in my study, I read all journal recordings of the deliberations for RH law since 2010 during the time of Noynoy Aquino, and they really these legislators, Catholic legislators who were being lobbied by their respective bishops, were from their own respective dioceses. They used the alternative moral justification given by these accommodationist religious leaders in order to justify their vote despite the moral objections of bishops. So you will see in those journal records and proceedings transcripts of both the Senate and HOR that when they are already voting in favor of the RH law, they will say these lines: I am Catholic, but my conscience states this, and then they will cite those accommodationist religious leaders as their basis as to justify their position. So it's like they are covering their guilt, their religious guilt during that time. when they voted in favor of the RH bill. So I also studied those justifications, uh, and I was able to group them into five arguments. So the accommodationist public theology is centered on the following five arguments. Number one is the religious freedom argument. Second, doctrinal infallibility argument. Complexity of reality argument. Argument from experience, and the middle ground argument. So what does these five arguments mean? So for the religious freedom argument, these are the arguments used by the legislators to justify their votes in reference to the columns written by these priests who are also legal luminaries who said that not all Filipinos are Catholics, so therefore the church should not bar the passage of a law that will also benefit non-Catholic Filipinos. So they cited that, the legislators. Second, doctrinal infallibility argument. These are cited by some legislators in reference to those religious leaders and theologians who said that um, the ruling or the Catholic Church teaching on artificial contraception is not a dogma, but only an authoritative policy document. So they mentioned this hierarchy of truth as their basis. Next is the complexity of reality argument combined, wherein they combined science and faith, saying that religion must be informed by science. So they have those kind of argument. And then argument from experience. These are the arguments used by legislators saying that the clergy has no right or moral authority to dictate on marital affairs because they themselves are unmarried. So yeah, they are celibate. And then middle ground argument. So this again from the Jesuit luminaries that were reiterated again by those legislators who are covering their guilt. They said that as Catholic, instead of having a black and white position or burning the whole house down, they will just work in order to ensure that everyone will benefit from the law. And yeah, and actually, I even interviewed a Jesuit priest who was consulted by by the legislators who filed this RH bill, and he's the one who he admitted to me in his interview that um he he is the one who placed the safeguards in the RH law in order to for some good conscience Catholics for them not to be implicated for refusing to offer artificial contraceptive services to their patients, so they can invoke their religious freedom and conscience right. So I'm not sure with the proper with the proper legal terminologies about that. So this study of mine was published in a book, and a little bit of self-promotion here. So my study is published as a book chapter of this book, International Studies in the Philippines. And it was originally published by Routledge, but we were able to negotiate a deal with the Ateneo de Manila University Press, wherein there's a local copy now being sold for the Philippine market. So it's available in the Ateneo de Manila University Press website or Shopee. So if you are interested to read more about my research on the RH law, I suggest this by our book. And with this book chapter that I'm saying, actually, there's a research puzzle that I provided there. And the research puzzle is about why is it that during the time of Aquino, RH law was passed, but divorce was passed despite the parallelism of conditions, that there's international push for divorce also to be legislated. Aquino was kinda partially in favor of it, and then the other support from the civil society. And I argue in this chapter that it's because during the RH bill, there's a unified position among the accommodationists or the progressive. During this time kasi, I still use the conservative progressive classification. But if I will be able have the chance to revise my chapter, I will now use the preservationist accommodationist label. So yeah, the accommodationists during the RH law were unified, and they are supported by Protestant groups such as Iglesia Ni Cristo, the NCCP, UCCP, etc. But for the divorce law, they are fragmented and they are absent. And even the Catholic religious leaders during that time are not willing to air their position in favor of divorce. So, as I have said, in my previous study that I mentioned, yeah, there's this absence of of a unified stance among the accommodationist religious leaders to articulate an alternative public theology in favor of divorce. And this is the thing that we need to, good-minded Catholics, that we need to watch out with what's happening with divorce. So, of course, there are other factors like the timing, the priorities of the legislators, etc. But you will see lately, with the ongoing religious debates about divorce, there is also the same patterns that happened with the reproductive health law. So, for example, a certain Catholic university certain faculty members of a Catholic university in Quezon City again released a statement stating their implicit support towards the divorce. Certain Catholic bishops have a very watered down support, watered down position and statement in opposition with divorce. The only thing that's different right now is that there's new actors and arrangements that are existing. Before in the RH law, for example, the Iglesia ni Cristo and the Catholic Church are pitted against each other because the Iglesia ni Cristo ruled in favor of RH bill. But now you will see that it was the Iglesia ni Cristo, especially its members in the Congress, and even Protestants and their representatives in the Congress, especially in House of Representatives, are the ones who are um, fighting seriously against the passage of the divorce bill. And it's actually surprising that the Catholic religious leaders who are very noisy during the RH bill debate, they are now quite mum, and they are having a very accommodationist, yeah, let's use the word accommodationist position with regards to divorce. So my reading here is that the accommodationists religious leaders have the upper hand, particularly if we are going to look at them at a coalitional standpoint, like the support coming from experts and theologians from prominent Catholic institutions, and active engagement of divorce supporters for youth support via social media methods. So yeah, especially the argument about personal stories of of abuse, etc. So my take here is that if the preservationists want to fight head to head with the accommodationists, the preservationists need to fight and recalibrate their communication strategy. So my suggestion is focus on personal stories, also about the bad effects of separation, of parental separation on the on the on the children, and in the broader in the long term to the broader society. So data is useful, but again, good personal narrative or story or personal narratives or stories have greater impact. Engage social media platforms by developing content that are short and entertaining. Unfortunately, that's the battle right now. I'm also working in a consultancy firm. We do strategic communications and PR, and it's really you need to engage both traditional media and the new media, including social media. So you need to utilize both. So also engage in the production of content that are short, entertaining, and catchy to deliver your point. And in this case, I suggest to diversify content development strategies and focus on the collective impacts of divorce towards the broader society. So, like the collective negative impacts of divorce towards the broader society. So that is my suggestion for preservationists if they want to fight and engage in a, or at least match or offset the power of the currently enjoyed by the accommodationist. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening.